How's it going, everybody? This is Juan Galt with the Sovereign Bitcoin podcast. I got a very special guest today. His name is Brandon Quitem, also known as the guy that wrote the mushroom article. How are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing great, Juan. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to have you. I read your Twitter thread, and I sort of read some of your article. You've written a lot, very extensive, and it's academic grade stuff. So I'm sure it's really a fascinating topic. Unfortunately, I don't have as much time to go into depth into the topics that I like as I'd like to. But that's why I wanted to have you on so we could sort of discuss some of these topics and hash them out. This is not going to be a normal podcast. This is going to be a very trippy podcast. If you are on drugs, sit down and enjoy the ride. If you're not on drugs, maybe you might want to get some drugs because it's going to be it's going to be a trip. Before we get to it, though, I just want to tell you guys, Anarchapulco 2019 is coming soon. Just a little quick promo. I'm going to be speaking at Anarchapulco. I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin, multi-generational wealth, and how to keep the money in the family, right? If that's what we want. Obviously, if we're thinking of Bitcoin as a store of value long-term, this is inheritance is actually quite a significant issue that, as far as I can tell, remains unresolved. And so I've been exploring this topic. I'm going to be talking about some of the problems and sort of explaining the situation and discussing what I see is going to happen might happen as far as the way that custody works in crypto. And I'll also be delivering a workshop where I'll be teaching normal crypto users, not James Bond or other sort of super agents or super people, but just normal people, everyday people, how to secure their digital assets with very easy to use tools that are very secure and very popular, right? And so check that out. We got early bird prices right now, and more content will be coming out on that soon. All right. So Brandon, how did you get into this world of fungi and Bitcoin?
Yeah, for sure. So maybe I'll just start with fungi. So I started my fungi journey as a young kid, eating steak with the family for Christmas, things like that. I just slowly developed a palate for mushrooms. But from that point on, it was just sort of a food thing that I sort of didn't really pay attention to, but I liked it. And then a couple years after college, this might be 2012, around the same time I found Bitcoin, I started foraging for mushrooms, which is just walking around in the woods with a little field guide so you know what you're looking for, and picking mushrooms out of the forest, bringing them home, and eating them, which is actually a massive adrenaline rush. It's extremely fun out there treasure hunting, and I could go on forever about foraging, but it really connects you to the place. You see the seasons change. It's a wholesome activity. Sometimes I bring home 20 pounds of food, and fun to do with your friends. And so since then, I started learning from people like Paul Stamets and all the other mushroom elders, let's say, and the place is fascinating. I don't know why more people don't pay attention to fungi. We'll get more into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you go and hunt down some fungi, and I guess you studied how to know which ones are like poisonous and which ones are not.
Yeah,
Or
exactly right. Most people always are concerned with that, and rightfully so. Many mushrooms can kill you. And so, yeah, you just grab a book, understand what's around you, and just like the Bitcoin developers, conservatism is key with fungi because people die every year, and it's no sense in risking that.
fascinating. So yeah, I can see the thrill, right? Like you're like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, the eating part's not as much of a thrill. It shouldn't be a thrill. When you're eating the mushrooms, you should know exactly what you're eating.
Yeah, you should.
But searching for them in the woods, you're just jumping over sticks and logs and turning around corners, and then all of a sudden you come upon this beautiful flush of a mushroom, and that part's exciting. It's
Wow.
surprisingly addicting.
Yeah, no, that sounds beautiful. That sounds amazing. Yeah, I like to do that. I wonder, there's got to be some mushrooms here in Colombia, like
Absolutely.
definitely, right?
Tons.
Yeah,
Tons.
cool. Maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll look into that.
Yeah.
That's great. And so you started to study fungi, and you've written a series of articles that, I mean, I'm blown away by it. It seems to me there's a new kind of intellectual, let's say, I guess I'll use the word movement in the internet, where people like that are, you know, just fascinated by a topic will do serious research and writing work and just publish it online, and it's not locked up in some library or something. Is this something that you've sort of specialized in? Did you maybe study like biology or something like that?
No, good question. First, to comment on that trend, I think it's amazing. The internet allows people with micro niches to go all in on a topic and put out the paper or the Medium article. And then maybe it's not like a scientific journal or something, but people with that interest can find it and accelerate their learning. And I find that to be amazing. But in terms of formal education, I have absolutely none with biology. I took biology in college, whatever the first biology class was, which I've always liked. But no, mushrooms is just like everything in my life. I follow my nose. If I'm interested in something, I tend to be obsessed with it, which is certainly Bitcoin right now and for the foreseeable future. And so, yeah, I just follow the things I'm interested in. And I'm particularly fascinated by subject matters that I can't really master. I think there's some sort of a high that I achieve on the learning curve where I'm rapidly learning and making new parallels and connecting ideas. And I love that process. But as soon as that learning curve starts to taper off, let's say I'm at 90% understanding, I start to lose interest. And so, things like fungi or yoga or Bitcoin, there's really no end to the proverbial rabbit hole. And
Mhm.
so those are the
Really?
type of things that I hold on to long term.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, and I think I'm like that as well. I mean, it sounds like you're a generalist, or at least that's the word that I've found to describe this personality. Um, not to put you in a box or something, but it seems like maybe that there's yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah,
Definitely.
and Bitcoin is it's fascinating. Bitcoin, it just goes on forever, which, for those that are confused about why a Bitcoin podcast is talking about mushrooms, these articles you wrote compare Bitcoin to fungi and say and sort of make the case that Bitcoin is a living organism, in a sense, a fungi-like organism that is lives on the internet. And this is actually something that I've discussed a few times with other people. If you guys, people that follow my work, I made a presentation at and I think I got this from the Cinero guys. This was like an altcoin community at one point from Ethereum. They're trying to build like this decentralized social network, and they really blew my mind when they said that. Well, they just made me realize that there is such a thing as multi-human, like superhuman organisms. So in a sense, I think we are like the cells of this superorganism, and there's a variety of them. And Bitcoin is one of those new beasts in that meta field, in that sort of other dimension, so to speak. Not to get too trippy, but like so.
Absolutely right. Just like what you mentioned with our organs, the way we evolved is these little contained organisms, and then we're a bunch of little contained organs that make up a superorganism. A great analogy. And I think the cool part about science right now in that field is looking at the gut biome. And if you total all the cells in our meat suit, 90% of the cells in our meat suit are not human cells, which means we have a whole bunch of microbiology, mostly in our gut. And in many ways, that's what's driving the ship. So let's say we have an addiction to sugar, which most people do. Um, one way you could say, yeah, our brain receives dopamine from sugar, but on another way, we have organisms in our gut that feed off this sugar. And our gut and our brain are connected. They send messages between each other. So let's say you're eating a bunch of sugar and then you stop. The gut biome is saying, hey, I need the sugar. This is our food. So they can send messages to your brain saying, hey, go get some more sugar, man. We're starving down here.
Wow, it's it's a fascinating thing, and it's very trippy to think about it like that, because I think the normal, like the normal mimetic of how we think about identity and stuff is like you are a person and you're doing things in the human world, but at some point, once you do some mushrooms, maybe some magic mushrooms, and some LSD or something, you start thinking, oh well, wait a second. And you see all these layers, right? And you can reach that without doing drugs. I'm just kind of joking around, but um there's a whole other layer. So maybe tell us a little bit about what are the differences between fungi and let's say the living organisms that we're sort of used to thinking about, right? Like mammals and reptiles and so on.
Yeah, good question. So, first of all, fungi are their own kingdom for anyone who doesn't know that. And so, plants and animals, fungi, eukaryote, prokaryote, etc. And there's more fungi than there is ants or plants and animals combined. And they take all different forms. They're the oldest, not exactly the oldest organism on our planet, but one of the oldest multicellular organisms. And plants are very different from humans, but fungi and animals have a lot in common, where we both inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide. Plants are the inverse. And there was a super kingdom called Opisthokonta, I think I said that right, that some scientists have proposed that combine fungi and animals together. And sometime a long time ago, we branched off on our evolutionary biology.
Wow.
And what humans did was we decided to have internal stomachs, and fungi have external stomachs. And so the main form of a fungi is mycelium, which is a underground one cell wall thick, essentially a root structure. And this root structure is underground. It connects plants and trees, and everything's all connected underground in this incredibly complex microbiology ecosystem. And this is the same way where trees can broker resources through this mycelial medium. It sends information and resources bidirectionally underground. And you could look at this as the immune system of the forest. It's the neurological network of the forest. Some people call it the wood wide web instead of the world wide web. And we're just starting to understand this stuff, but it's absolutely mind-blowing. It has a lot of implications, and there's a lot of learning to be had from the fungi kingdom. And I think people are starting to wake up to that, and that makes me extremely happy.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I think the first time that I discovered the whole universe that's underground, there's this nutritionist that was talking about, and this is controversial, and get ready, trigger warning. Um, it's like veganism versus meat eaters, right? And this guy is sort of a nutritionist. He's very sort of kind of feng shui Buddhist style, so he doesn't really take like ideological positions. And he was saying, well, listen, like obviously, if you eat burgers all day at McDonald's, you're gonna get sick, and if you completely quit garbage food and start eating vegetables only, you're gonna get better, but you're still missing certain nutrition. And then when you talk about the moral argument, for example, it seems like people that are, let's say, are vegetarian don't recognize that there's this huge life. There's so much life underneath the soil, and there's like warfare happening in the soil in order to feed the trees, right? It's something like the trees are dependent, like certain plants, right? Vegetables are dependent on these worms, and the worms have to eat certain things and poop them, and that becomes a sort of protein that the tree eats. So if there's like animal wars happening under soil that we never see and never think about, and it's probably more complex than we'll ever really comprehend. Um, yeah, so that's very exciting. Now, Bitcoin. What is how do you see Bitcoin in this context? What are some of the parallels that really struck you that between fungi and Bitcoin?
Yeah, definitely. First, before we even jump into that, I've got to
Sure.
say, I am so surprised at how well this sort of article series, Tweet Storms, have been going, because most of the Bitcoin discourse I see and I pay attention to is around things like monetary economics and game theory and distributed systems and things like that. And here I go putting out an article that Bitcoin's a mushroom, and a lot of people reached out to me personally in DMs or just on the threads or whatever, saying how much it resonated and how interesting it was. And so that makes me really optimistic. And I think it points to the diversity of the Bitcoiners out there. We're not Bitcoin maximalists who don't critical think or whatever this nonsense people say.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoiners are diverse, and you can see that with things like the visions of Bitcoin. Nick Carter article, shout out there, where he kind of tracks over time what people think Bitcoin is and what's the prevailing narrative. I find that kind of stuff really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is just one little subset where people are starting to look at Bitcoin from an organic systems or turning to biology to try to explain it.
Mm.
And Dan Held's article, Planting Bitcoin, that series there looking at the genesis of Bitcoin, that was sort of the thing that pushed me over the edge to say, okay, you should publish this wacky idea comparing Bitcoin to Mycelium. And yeah, I mean, I love that trend. I think the natural world has already solved the majority of the engineering or design problems that we have. And so things like biomimicry, where you're just looking at nature to try to solve design problems, is fascinating. And I think more people need to spend time and resources in that field. So that's my long-winded preamble to the Bitcoin's mycelium story. Okay, cool. Do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, that's fascinating. It is really interesting, and we could just we'll go with that train of thought. I mean, I did see the reaction. You got a huge amount of tweets and of likes and retweets, and are you a religious person anywhere? Like, are you into sort of theology or anything like that?
I grew up in a Christian family. Sometime in middle school or high school, I just wasn't really buying what they were selling
Yeah,
and
yeah.
sort of distanced myself. Then I went pretty hardcore atheist. Religion is a mind virus that makes everyone worse
Hmm.
off. And I would say in the last few years, I think I've come back towards there might be a purpose for religions. They've been around for a while. There's knowledge buried in these tomes, even if the
Mm.
modern interpretations of them are complete bullshit. And I don't like the systems around the religions where now it seems like instead of encouraging people to have a direct personal religious experience, there's sort of this wall saying, no, you got to come to the priest class and we'll give you these metaphoric
Mm.
religious experiences with the stupid little wafer cookie or the wine or whatever the sacraments are. And there's like this withholding of the knowledge, and it becomes, sort of a power structure disseminate information. And that's just a remnant of our past, where I think looking forward, humans have this, whether it's a religious gene or tendency or whatever it is, there's big questions out there that we don't fundamentally understand.
Mm.
And so humans forever have been looking to the stars to say, what is it? Why are we here? And so I think those fundamental questions need to be addressed for most people in some way. I tend to lean more towards let's extract the fundamental truths we can out of religion, but I don't dogmatically follow any of them. I kind of find my religious experience through things like being in nature or certain types of mushrooms we might have been talking about earlier. That's where I find my religious connection.
Hmm. Yeah, and I asked that question because I mean it's fascinating to hear your story because my story was very much the same way. You know, I was raised Catholic, and then I went really hard atheist for about 10, 15 years, and then in the past 2, 3 years, I've sort of come back to maybe there's such a thing as an adaptive or functional truth, a kind of sort of metaphorical adaptive beliefs, and now maybe religion makes sense in that sense. And obviously Jordan Peterson is and has had a big influence on me and is sort of discussing these topics and debating atheists all over the place and having this really kind of interesting discussion because he's a scientist, a psychologist, etc. But he's also kind of religious. And I think there's some elements of Bitcoin that are in that realm. Like we have certain memes in Bitcoin that are, I think, defensive, right? So like the HODL meme is a meme that's pragmatically useful. If you scientifically analyze it, there's going to be moments where HODL is going to be optimal and where it's not going to be. But for you to figure out what moment that is, the practical reality is you're likely to fail and lose money, and so you're better off just hodling, right? And so there's becomes this meme that's like adaptive, and then there's a bunch of other ones, right? I think hodl is probably the biggest one. There's like the BIDL one, so you buy Bitcoin and then you build things, and over time the price of Bitcoin will go up and reward you. That's sort of one of the development strategies or sort of contribution strategies to Bitcoin.
Definitely. I view Bitcoin in many ways as a religious movement. And, Bitcoin's many things. So to say it's a religious movement is silly to
Right.
say. It's one way to view the Bitcoin ecosystem. And I think that actually is a massive net positive. Imagine all the struggles that Bitcoin's already faced and what's going to come ahead. And if you don't have sort of that religious zealot-like tendency, maybe it's not enough enthusiasm to get this thing out the door. And I think I heard it on Marty Bent's podcast. I think it was Bitcoin Sign Guy, but he made this line where he's just out there trying to provide cover fire so Bitcoin can get through the door. And I found that to be just amazing. Like, we got to make it strong enough, resilient enough to where it truly cannot be defeated. And I would say we're probably not quite there yet. I would
Yeah.
say if you look at like J.W. Weatherman's threat model or something like that, it's pretty sound, but there are theoretical ways to kill Bitcoin today, or at least dramatically slow it down. I don't know if you could actually kill it. For sure, slow it down.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because I don't know that there is perfect defense. I think we live in a universe where there's no perfect defense. There's this classic dilemma, which is the juggernaut versus the blob. So the juggernaut is unstoppable, and the blob is unmovable. Those two can't exist in the same universe. They're literal contradictions. And so the result of that dilemma is we either in a world where there's juggernauts and no blobs, or there's blobs but no juggernauts. And I think we live in a world where there's probably juggernauts, and no blobs. But that doesn't mean that we can't build strong enough defenses. And I mean, it is, I think, theoretically, nobody's claimed that Bitcoin is indestructible, but it's supposed to be very hard to destroy, and very expensive to destroy. And hopefully that's, I mean, I do, I don't think we've won yet. I have my concerns as well, particularly around how custody might, like big custodial services like Bakkt is coming out with, and Fidelity and Coinbase, and all these exchanges. Like, I'm concerned about the effect that might have on, say, future conflicts around consensus. Um, but aside from that, I mean, and the proof of work is a developing thing. I think proof of work is strong enough. I'm not really, it's the most secure proof of work sort of network out there by, just by far. Like, no supercomputers can compete with it. It's going to be interesting. There's a lot of things that could happen, right? I mean, there's a lot of theoreticals, but I do believe that it's very strong and very expensive. It's very expensive to destroy. And I don't know that governments really have that much of an interest, because governments are people, right? Governments is just individuals, right? And that's, I think, the mistake that a lot of, let's say, political activists make, is they start to create categories of people, and they start to try to go against or for categories of people. But at the end, it's just people. There's just individuals doing things. The marketplace is just individuals doing things, and politics and governments are just individuals doing things. And at some point, people are gonna be like, maybe we don't want to destroy this Bitcoin thing, right? And assuming they could, right? And anyway, we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. But it's got a very good chance to be a real kind of like this politically neutral money.
Definitely. And I think along the same lines, as governments are just people, you've got guys like Giancarlo, who is pro Bitcoin. He has been for a long time. And, is he just a Bitcoin mole in the government trying to actually support Bitcoin from the inside versus a more totalitarian government outlook that could be achieved in a place like China or otherwise?
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's just you can't like, if somebody manages to corrupt Bitcoin and make it as some sort of totalitarian thing, it would kind of defeat the purpose of it. You might as well just go back to fiat. Um, so there's this article that came out, I think, by the Fed, the American Federal Reserve, which was like, yeah, I guess we could create a cryptocurrency digital dollar thing, but why would we, like, no, it does, like, we wouldn't want to distribute it because that takes away our power from the money supply. And at that point, we end up with a database. And if we have a database, we don't really need to do cryptographic verification quite that extreme. We just have a database, and like, so nah, I think we're good. And
Right, right. And that's absolutely right. They already have a cryptocurrency in the sense that they're describing, right? They have the fiat digital money, and yeah,
yeah,
why I put all the extra nonsense on top when at the end of the day it's going to be the same.
yeah, they already have digital money, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. Should we jump into a few more of these
Yeah, let's
comparisons?
do it.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I have a feeling we could talk for a long time about all kinds of
Definitely.
stuff, but I don't want to miss out on some of these
Yeah, let's
ideas.
do it.
Um, Okay, let's see. So we talked about mycelium. Mycelium is a decentralized underground network. It's like a little mini root system or a little mini internet underground. And when the time is right, this root system senses the environment and it produces a mushroom. And that mushroom is simply the sexual organ of the mycelium. And that sexual organ releases seeds, which are called spores, and those spores land somewhere else and propagate. And so that's just sort of the functional overview of a mushroom.
Fascinating.
And most people think mushrooms are the organism. That's why I always describe that. So by picking mushrooms, that's like picking an apple off the tree. You're not actually harming the organism underground. And so, like we said before, they share information bidirectionally. It's a resource transport system, and they're in really hostile conditions. So picture the little tips of the root system exploring underground. And eventually they come across either a predator or a prey. And in either situation, they have to either increase their defenses or find a way to eat a new food source. So what the mushroom does, or the mycelium does, it sends information backwards to the mushroom scientists. And the mushroom scientists use chemistry to create a new enzyme, either to attack or defend what they just found. And then it ships this new enzyme, never been created before, to the ends, to the complexity on the edge, and then that enzyme is then propagated throughout the system, and it accomplishes the goal. And so if you think about it from that angle, Bitcoin is very similar. Think of Bitcoin as a living system. It responds to the stimuli in its environment. Let's say there's unmet demand somewhere. You could look at the different use cases for Bitcoin, like a non-sovereign store of value if you're in Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil, etc. Now all of a sudden there's this unmet demand, and now there's an incentive mechanism inside Bitcoin to go achieve or consume that unmet demand. Right? Or what about an example where there's a new threat model or a new attack vector of Bitcoin, like the CEV bug we found a few months ago? In that situation, there is a new attacker, and the Bitcoin scientists, just like the mushroom scientists, whip up a patch and just like an enzyme, and they ship that out, nodes propagate, and now all of a sudden Bitcoin is stronger. So both mycelium and Bitcoin over time, they're hardened from the hostility, the hostile environment that they're in. And all these little mini fights, you can look at Bitcoin infighting as a toxic thing, or you can look at Bitcoin infighting as a bunch of little skirmishes that are preparing the organism for a bigger fight, right? And each time it gets stronger and stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in Bitcoin, we can identify some of these Bitcoin scientists, and they sort of kind of like emerge, like they show up out of the masses. They like somebody just, hey, I can do that, and they show up, and then they contribute to Bitcoin, and they build the thing, and then they disappear sometimes and stuff. Is there actually like, can you identify the mushroom scientists in the mushroom kingdom? Like, is there like a particular form, or is it more like some sort of underground magic network that we don't really quite understand?
Yeah, good question. I don't know that answer, so if I was to spout off on that, it would just be sort of shooting from the hip. My understanding is that there's not actually specialized mushroom scientists. It's just the way that the organism is. It's completely decentralized, and so it just looks at cells and performs chemistry. So fungi are the best chemists on our planet. A nice parallel
Wow.
to humans is that the majority of our medicine is actually either directly from fungi or we explore fungi and then we copy it in a lab. And the reason why is our biology is quite similar to fungi, and the fungi over time, through the process we described earlier, they've just built up this chemical library for their own selfish benefit to protect themselves. And luckily, the mushroom is very
Wow.
symbiotic. So, in the same way that trees get attacked underground, the mycelium goes into the root structure and it forms a relationship with all the trees. And in this process, the tree, by extension through the mushroom, has an improved immune system. So the mushroom gains, let's put it this way, trees create sugar through photosynthesis, and then the trees pay the mushroom in sugars in exchange for a better immune system and minerals. So the mushroom's incentivized to look underground to convert rocks or dead bugs or whatever to find minerals, and then it gives it to the tree. So if a tree didn't have a mushroom ally, aka it wouldn't have these minerals, a tree might only be 18 inches or 2 feet tall. And so when you start to look at the world through the mushroom's eyes, pretty much everything is foundationally connected to it. Like our topsoil, we have what, 18 inches of topsoil. It took 1 billion years to create this, and mushrooms created topsoil by eating rocks and spitting out the base molecular compounds that the rocks were
Wow.
made from. And and speaking of the network archetype, so mycelium's a network archetype. The internet's Bitcoin is neurons, dark matter, and space. All these things form the same network distributed archetype. And what does that tell us? Mushrooms are very old, very successful. Same with looking at how space is. So what you could say is that biology uh, uses the network archetype as a strategy, and it's very effective over time. So when you think about things like the internet, it's sort of like an emergent property of biology that eventually it tests out the network archetype and it's often successful. Same with Bitcoin. It's almost obvious if you look at it from a long evolutionary biology standpoint that of course, we would create a decentralized value transfer system.
Hmm. So would it be fair to say that something like a fiat currency, which has a central bank which, dictates supply and demand, or no, so supply over the units of account, right? And then they kind of like direct interest rates, even though the peg between the interest rate dictates of a Federal Reserve and banks following it, it's not it's not like there's a gun to their head per se, but there's enough of a sort of almost like an economic incentives and maybe semi-political incentives. It's not exactly clear how that connection works, but what we know is that traditionally banks follow the interest rate sort of suggestions of the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve leads those decisions, and so it practically controls them. So that there's sort of like a brain in a sense of this sort of government-run fiat currencies, and in that sense, it has an maybe it's fair to say that it's like it has like an internal metabolism or something like that, or maybe or has sort of central organs, right? Like with mycelium, you're saying it's sort of it's they're basically roots and chemical systems, and they probably have significant redundancy, whereas with like with a deer or a bear, right? It has like a heart and it has a stomach and it has a brain, and if you take it out, if take any of those three parts more or less, you're dead. The animal is dead, and so it doesn't have the same redundancy, but it has different efficiency kind of like benefits, right? So Bitcoin is the obviously the mycelium of money, and then decentralized currencies are more like the reptiles or mammals, or if I wanted to take a jab at them, the dinosaurs of money, right? Obviously,
I think we should go with the dinosaurs due to the obvious
for
concept
obvious
there.
reasons.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think what you're speaking to is the fact that government fiat money is, there's no competition, right? They have a natural monopoly on that. And so when you have a natural monopoly, there's no incentives to compete. They're not being hardened by hostility. They're not having to adapt. They can have a whole bunch of bureaucratic dragging along social programs and
Mm.
outdated government policy, whatever. And it's fragile in that sense. And also the idea of trying to centrally plan an economy is completely insane. That's not possible to have all that information. Whereas the Bitcoin system has millions of little endpoints, and on these endpoints, there's so much complexity and there's so much information transfer that the whole of a Bitcoin system has a tremendous amount of information, way more feedback than any centralized planning could have.
Yeah.
Obviously, that comes with a massive inefficiency, like you were pointing to. But I think that deficiency in Bitcoin, or inefficiency in Bitcoin, I should say, that is what enables us to have a non-sovereign money. And so that trade-off is worthwhile in this case. Now, is that same trade-off worthwhile for every single token project and all this other stuff? Probably not. Yet to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd say we've seen enough failures in the ICO space and in the sort of even in the altcoin space that we can probably say that whatever Bitcoin has, it's not that it can't. I mean, it probably can't be replicated. Nothing is impossible, maybe, but it's theoretically possible for someone to recreate Bitcoin, not in the sense of copy paste, but in the sense that it was made in, sort of like in the dark, like nobody knew that it was happening. It was made with good intention, during a critical, great timing moment, right? It attracted the best of a very niche industry to build the foundations. The creator, the father of Bitcoin, in a sense, was anonymous and then vanished. Like that series of of steps, and also didn't build a backdoor into it. After 10 years of open source sort of development on it, we haven't found the backdoor. There was no pre-mine, no insta-mine, even though like he in theory mined about 1 million Bitcoins. Anybody could have mined 1 million Bitcoins, so it has sort of like, it was like a fair start. You know, you just, if you just don't know, you don't know, and nobody and most people don't know about almost anything, right? But if you're paying attention, you would have found it, and a lot of people found it and made a lot of money, right? And so that those are a lot of very specific variables in which make Bitcoin what it is, and it's not the copy paste code that a lot of altcoins do. That's not the magic. The magic is the timing, the intention, etc. All the things that I said, and to recreate that might not be possible now, especially knowing how much money can be done in it. Because you know, to him, to Satoshi, according to the writings, like it was an experiment. It's like let's do it. Let's see what happens, right? It wasn't like holy moly, $100 billion, right? I mean, he probably thought like it could work, but even like I've been around for 5 years, and I always believed that it was going to go to the moon. And when it went to 20,000 last year, I could not believe it. I was like, did not expect this. like
Sure.
I thought about it, but I emotionally I was not prepared for that at all. Like it was just, it was shocking in a sense. I did take some profits, because I've seen a few of those moons, and
Right.
it reminds me like maybe the moon cycle is sort of like the mushroom itself of the mycelia, right? It sort of pops up and it sends spores, and it sends seeds around, and that brings sort of that expands the network, but it takes a while for that to become a thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think you said a lot of good stuff there, but on that last point, to piggyback, yeah, totally. We're in a bear market now. Who knows how long it's going to be? I tend to believe Murad in the sense that the cycles are getting longer, but it definitely mimics the mushroom's reproductive cycle. So the majority of the mushroom's life is spent underground as mycelium, and then when conditions are right, it produces a mushroom. Let's say December 2017. Now that mushroom, out of nowhere, in 1 to 3 days, it doubles in size every day, and it comes out of nowhere, boom, huge mushroom. Then it releases its spores, sometimes in the billions. These little tiny spores fly away and land, and then they go underground. And then the mushroom quickly decays, the hype quickly wears off, price plummets, and now all the mushroom mycelium's underground. And that's sort of like the bear market, right? All the activity is happening under the surface. And if you just take a quick glance, you don't see the mushroom, you don't see the hype anymore. But in reality, I think 2018 was an incredibly important year for Bitcoin, especially with Lightning
Yeah.
Network. And there's so much cool stuff going underground. And I think that that's where we're at. We're going to be slowly building underground until the conditions are right before Bitcoin produces another mushroom, another hype cycle, and
Mm.
hopefully we take profits and the cycle
Hmm. That's great. So it's not a rocket that takes us to the moon; it's a mushroom.
returns. Definitely.
Mm. I have to do some painting, some find new memes, man.
Yeah, the fungus is spreading, Pompliano. Forget the virus, it's the fungus.
It's the fungus.
One more thing you mentioned about the genesis story of Bitcoin and how unique that is, and a lot of people rally around it, and how it'd be hard to replicate. Absolutely true, right? There's a couple different shelling points in Bitcoin that I think make up the social contract. And so you have the genesis story, how fair it was, the anonymous founder, all this type of stuff. You also have things like a hard supply cap, and you have the censorship resistant side and the ease of running a node, right? That's probably like more or less the short list of things that pretty much all Bitcoiners agree on. And then there's some other things that people might not agree on. And what I think is interesting about Bitcoin is, yeah, you can copy the code, but that doesn't really do anything because it's not a code system. It's a social system that's then automated through the code.
Mm,
And I think a lot of people are stuck on that. And I went through the full
right.
cycle of altcoins are great, the blockchain, everything. I went through that all.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you divorce the fact that it's not just technology and it's not an
Mm,
app, it's not Silicon Valley's next big thing. As soon as you step out of that, it becomes far more interesting to me. And I think if the altcoin or blockchain, everything people understood that simple fact, I think that would make a big difference. And I think, part of what my thinking is lately is how do we convert, in a religious sense, maybe not, how do we convert the multi-coiners or the no coiners into seeing the uniqueness of Bitcoin? And you know what I mean? It's almost like we need to
Yeah,
switch on our messaging. We need to get our messaging right
yeah,
as a group in some sense.
yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I went through the same thing, I went through the whole altcoin phase, right? Like I discovered Bitcoin and I was like, whoa, I went to $1,000. Okay, I'm dropping everything. I'm just going all in on Bitcoin. And then, and then I studied Bitcoin for about a year or two with at this meetup in Toronto, and I got to learn from really like very well knowledgeable people at the time, which was really lucky for me. And then I went down this altcoin tour to find the next Bitcoin so I could get rich, right? And yeah, I mean, I did the full tour. I can tell you stories. I can tell you like the family trees of a variety of altcoins. Today there's so many, right? But I can like if you give me two, three facts, like, oh, okay, that comes from Purecoin. Okay, that comes from that's obviously an Ethereum fork. Oh, that's Bitcoin. Right? That's Bitcoin, whatever, right? So I did the full tour, and yeah, I think that's a really fascinating realization. Is there's something more to Bitcoin than the code, and I think there is some altcoins that may become useful, have their own function, but even to compare them to Bitcoin as a store of value and as something that can, from a pure investment perspective, very few things will gain the value, the valuation that Bitcoin might acquire as a sort of as a store of value, right? Like if you look at gold is like something like what is it, like 30 trillion, I think, in market
I think
cap.
6 or 7 maybe.
It's 6 or 7 trillion.
That's my understanding, yeah.
We should
Which is
look that up. Yeah, total market cap of gold. I mean, the dot-com bubble was 6 trillion at the top, at peak. The sort of how does Bitcoin value of all gold in the world? And so that's a very high valuation, and for any altcoin to try to like, or even ICO company to think that they can reach anywhere near that is very very unreasonable. Okay, I got the number. It's 3 zeros, 6 zeros, 9 zeros, 12 zeros. Holy fuck! 100, 1,000, a million, a billion, 7 trillion. Yeah, 8 trillion. Oh, that's a big valuation, right? That's a long ways from here. That's about we were
massive.
100 billion. Yeah, so that's an 80x. It's not bad.
For sure. And
But
that's one of the, I would say, the near-term goals of Bitcoin is to be a non-sovereign store of value and eat away at gold's market share. But then you have things like Lightning Network where you're starting to be a payment processor. And as we go, like Bitcoin could be many different things back to it being a living organism. It's just going to consume unmet demand. And I think
mm,
there's a really interesting parallel with fungi here, and that's looking at genetics. So most of genetics is passed, genes are passed down from parent to offspring in what's called vertical gene transfer. Typical, you have the genes from your parents. Now, fungi have been known to do something called
wow.
horizontal gene transfer. And horizontal gene transfer is when multiple organisms are competing in the same ecosystem, and the fungi is under duress, it's stressed, it's not doing so hot. So what it does is it actually steals genetic information from a separate species competing in the same environment in an attempt to implement those ideas, sort of like take what works and leave the rest kind of environment. And it was noticed by looking at dung and different mushrooms that consume cattle dung or something like that. And what they found is that looking at the two separate genetic lineages, the two different species that occupy the same niche, let's say dung, they're way more similar, even though their genetic ancestors are tremendously different. So essentially, fungi converge on similar traits based on their ecosystem because they steal each other's genetic information. And long story short, I hope that made sense, is
It does. Yeah.
Bitcoin, in a sense, can steal genetic information from altcoins, right? This is just
Hmm.
another way to look at the same thesis of if altcoins produce anything valuable, ultimately Bitcoin will likely implement it. And I tend to believe that. And I think we're seeing that right now with the Lightning Network sort of taking the fast, cheap payments away from altcoins. And we also have things like Lightning Jewel, the browser extension, being able to essentially do what BAT does, the basic attention token. And so I
Mm.
think what we're going to see is tokens being removed from these potentially good ideas like ZeroX or basic
Mm.
Brave browser. And just why don't we just use Lightning Network, right? Money is a
Yeah.
effect. We don't need unnecessary friction. Um, you know, forget the people trying to get rich off these bullshit tokens. Like, use Lightning Network, build a cool product, monetize it a new way, different way.
Yeah. And it's all personal to these projects, right? Like I genuinely understand the desire to innovate and the desire to make money for sure. I mean, but
Definitely.
it's just like the economics of currency just don't work like that. Private currencies are garbage. Like it blows my mind, as somebody that's grown up over the past decade or so libertarian and thinking that privatize everything, yay. It's really daunting to me or really, well, fascinating, not really daunting anymore. Just fascinating to see that private currencies are just garbage, like just terrible. Because nobody trusts them, nobody has confidence in it. They're completely centralized, and they have a massive friction because you have to like come in. Like, have you seen that video about the lemonade coin or crypto lemonade?
Yes. Whoever did that's a genius. That was so great.
Genius. Absolutely, you have to watch it. Maybe I'll play it right now. No, okay. I don't know if I'm gonna play it right now, but it's really funny. And it basically like okay, I'm gonna play it right now. Okay, it played. So that's the problem with private currencies and Bitcoin as a public currency, as a transparent currency that anybody can look at, that anybody can audit, and you can build layers on top. So the first layer is sort of hardcore, redundant, secure, and then the second layer we're going to be seeing, we're already seeing Lightning Network like fast, secure transactions, and who knows what else is going to be built on top. And you also have like the anonymity of Lightning Network, which may solve the one of the biggest concerns with Bitcoin is that it might become like a surveillance grid that nobody can get rid of. Um, Now we have things like addresses, like Bitcoin addresses that are SegWit addresses, but they look like legacy addresses. And then on top of that, you can do the whole sort of on-chain lightning ramps, like the what are they called? The channels, right? You can open channels, but a lot of that stuff is sort of like a private client-side script that you have the script and it just resolves to a hash, which is I think I'm butchering the technical details here, but it might be like the transaction ID or something like that. So basically, like you have the private key and you have the script, and on the Bitcoin network, you don't know what the script is and you don't know what kind of address it is. So it's like even more anonymous. Like you're camouflaging Lightning, among the legacy addresses. So this is it's a big deal. And then obviously Lightning, everything is off chain, so there's no on chain record. All the transactions are happening off chain, which is basically pre-signed checks that you're exchanging with people, so to speak. So, I mean, I'm very excited about that. I think Lightning might be, it might kill two birds with one stone. We'll see, but it won't be the only innovation.
Yeah, and I speaking of that, I tend to agree that with the culture war coming up between fungibility on the base layer and verifiability of the supply cap, I tend to agree with the side that says the base layer needs to be auditable to ensure the supply cap, and then let's achieve as
Right.
much fungibility and privacy as we can through Lightning and CoinJoin and all kinds of various technology, things like you were mentioning there. So. Yeah, that's definitely the next culture war, though. Forget big blocks, small blocks. Let's put that one to
Yeah,
rest.
that's the past. Yeah.
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 But I think that's cool. The next article I'm writing right now is about that culture war and kind of just exploring the decentralized, the off-chain governance, I'm sorry, or the unofficial governance of Bitcoin. I think that's actually really interesting and largely
Hmm.
misunderstood. And a lot of people have written cool things about it, but I just wrote a tweet recently. What is it? Oh, yeah. Talking about how, let's see, essentially these infighting and all this culture war stuff, they just minimize the attack surface of Bitcoin, right? We get to try all these bad ideas. As soon as they're bad, we can point to them saying, hey, Big Blocks is a bad idea. Look, it didn't work. And if you do that a bunch of different times, we sort of refine the core message of Bitcoin. And if we have a better core message, there's always going to be multiple messages, but if we get better at shedding the non good messaging, now we have this potent meme in order to recruit new members. And that lowers the user acquisition cost of Bitcoin if we want to look at it like an application. And all these failed attempts we can point to like battle scars. And over time, the Bitcoin meme gets stronger.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, I missed something there. So what is it that we can point to as battle scars?
The battle scars would be failed attempts to divert the culture of Bitcoin, and the culture is Bitcoin. So things like we need to scale on the base layer with bigger blocks. We now know that through the forking competition that the market didn't agree with that, and now they're forking into oblivion. And so let's say in 1 year someone says, hey, scaling's not up to par yet, we need bigger blocks. We can point to the battle scar of saying, hey, we already did that, it didn't work. The culture already made up their mind. Let's move on. And the more we have those battle scars, I believe that it's sort of refining Bitcoin, or a better way to look at it is we're getting a more clear picture of what this thing actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
clear picture, we can recruit new users easier.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and that suggests that the Bitcoin Cash sort of branding attack, and the culture that conflict, it recognized that there's a social layer to Bitcoin that needed to be sort of addressed, or at least it tried to change it through the social layer, and well, I mean, it failed. I think it's fair to say it failed quite hilariously, quite entertainingly, and it was tough. I mean, were you there during the fork? The great
I was paying
2017 fork.
attention. So I didn't purchase my first Bitcoin until 2017. And yeah, we never even went through this story, but I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011, 2012, when I was working at Oracle selling enterprise software. And some friends were talking about it as it relates to the Silk Road. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. Internet money. That's amazing. It's anonymous. Obviously not true, but at the time, sure, I thought so. And I sort of dismissed it as, I didn't really think of it as an investment. I thought it as a way to get around buying drugs on the internet. Then I heard about Bitcoin again in 2014. Right after I left Oracle, my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, took a year-long trip traveling through Asia. And I was at some meetups in Bali, which is a digital nomad hub. Met some people there, and I was definitely sold on Bitcoin at the time. But my life was more like hippie living out of a backpack, building online businesses, not really caring about things like that. And so I dismissed it again. And it wasn't until 2017 where, constantly friends hitting me up, hey, check it out, I just made a bunch of money, you got to pay attention here. It wasn't until that third time where it hit me in the face where I was like, okay, let's pay attention. Yeah. So like many people, I think it took me many times to see that message. Going back to the point where if we refine the message, what is this thing? It'll be easier. Maybe instead of 3 or 4 times here, I take 2 or 3 or 1 or 2 times. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. One of the things that Nick Szabo has talked about in regards to why Bitcoin is, valuable and why what it actually does is it narrows the surface of debate. So there's very few fundamental rules, right? There's a scarce supply cap. There's cryptographic sort of processes to verify and authenticate who owns what, and you can have certainty about that. There's certain finality to it. So like after 1 confirmation to 6 confirmations, it's done, and it's, so far nobody has succeeded at reverting more than like I think, I don't know if there's ever been a reorg more than 3 blocks, and from 6 down, like it's never happened. And so after 6 blocks, it's done. The money has been sent. So there's very few things to debate about in Bitcoin, and that allows us lets us relax, right? Because the more complexity that we can debate, the more drama that can be, the more emotional energy that humans have to invest in reaching the consensus. So that's a piece of that puzzle. As far as the narrative, as far as how to communicate Bitcoin to people, I think, right now we're in this sort of hard money stage, right? Before the earlier years of Bitcoin, it was like internet money, revolution of money, libertarian money. It is scarcity, digital scarcity, and and it was a very sort of creative time, a lot of union, and around the block size was the big debate, and some people say that like even people like Nick Szabo have said, well, this was a technical thing that shouldn't have become a popular debate at all. But I think the block size was the difference between putting a bunch of things on top of Bitcoin and making Bitcoin do a very specific high value thing instead, and then building things around it. And that's what the whole debate was about. So if you go look at Bitcoin Cash or the on-chain sort of big block kind of blockchains like even EOS or to some degree Ethereum, everybody's putting everything on them and they're breaking down because they can't sync their nodes. They're centralizing their topology. I sadly it's gonna be a while before these systems crack because of that level of centralization, if they even get there, by popular demand, right? Like if they're even like if anybody cares at that point. But Yeah, so that was a big part. Like, so Bitcoin is just this very specific high value thing versus putting everything on top of it. And anyway, I think that's a good question, and I don't really know the answer to it right now. Exactly how do we communicate better? How do we refine the message of what is Bitcoin? And that is one of the things that I think you're helping do is sort of let's think about this from a different perspective. Let's try to like what would you say that Fungi teaches us about Bitcoin?
Hmm. I mean, I'm still exploring that myself, to be honest. But I think the most telling points are kind of the things we went over in terms of the decentralized architecture and the fact that it's a proven archetype in nature. So we can be confident about that and how it evolves over time and how it's decentralized. It adapts to the environmental stimulus. It's constantly changing and moving based on its environment. I think that's probably the most telling thing. You can look at other more specific things like Bitcoin is sort of like an immune system, and it's sort of our planetary immune system fighting off cancerous governments or rent-seeking businesses, central bank seigniorage, debasement of the monetary supply, all the things we always talk about. It sort of protects us from humanity's tragic fault of greed. Throughout time, whoever controlled the money supply, it was only a matter of time before they debased the currency. And so if we have a public utility money that can't be debased or likely impossible to be debased, going back to Szabo, that is a foundational building block for social scalability. We just need to have that solved. We need to remove the option for greed, have fair money, and then we can build on top.
Yeah, and that's happening already. At least this bear market, I don't really feel like looking for high, high potential, exciting altcoins to put some money in early to, sell them later on. I don't really feel like that's that much of an opportunity now. I mean, and I really could be wrong, right? Because as a friend said, the last fool has not been born yet. So we might see another bubble, right? We might see another altcoin bubble. I really my sentiment around this has changed. Like I think the past years I knew there was gonna be another one to some degree, and I got caught up on him as well. But these days my sentiment around it is definitely that I don't know. I don't know that we'll break all time highs on the altcoins for a while again. Um anyway, we'll see what happens. I think that's one of the pieces, and that is the diminishment of this sort of easy money greed, right? Like back in the day, for me, it was like, okay, I want to make some money. Let's go find some altcoins. Look at the price. Okay, that looks decent. Let's throw a few $100 at it. Wait a couple weeks, through a month, and then whoosh, cash out, right? It was literally like that, and there was a few years of that, and I didn't have that much money, but like I made enough to do like these days. I don't really see that anymore. At least this bear market. I think this bear market is going to crush a lot of that, and eventually we might go back to something else, something new like that might happen. We'll see, but that's a good thing because now the businesses that are actually going to grow are the ones that are actually providing real value, not this sort of weird gambling that we've been doing for a few years.
Definitely. A healthy part of the cycle. I think it's important to do. I probably am holding still heavier bags than I would like from the December rally. I took profits, but I did not take enough profits. And so, yeah, now I'm a bit more consolidated. But I think a lot of people are holding things they wish they weren't holding. I think there's a little too much optimism in enterprise blockchain. I'm not very optimistic about that. I think tokens for everything. I think there's just still
Right.
massive valuations on silly projects, and until that
I
stuff
agree.
consolidates back into Bitcoin majorly, I don't think we're anywhere near a new cycle. I
Hmm.
wish we were, but I just don't think so. And even if
Yeah.
things like ETFs or back come out or whatever, is the demand actually there for it? You know what I mean? I don't know if it actually
Hmm.
is, but if we see small nation states chipping away at it, or we see hedge funds or family practices, if they start putting 0.5% in, I think that might start to move the needle. And I also tend to believe that it's going to be slow for a long time until it's really fast.
Yeah. And I mean, we're comparing Bitcoin to the dollar, right? Like that's one of the big issues is that a lot of these discussions happen in English in the context of America and technology, in Western technology, but compared to the dollar, like Bitcoin, like the dollar is very strong right now. I think it's stronger than most people predicted it, anywhere be, 3 years back. Like everybody that I knew, and I think even the sentiment in the States, as far as I could tell, was that, shit was hitting the fan, especially around the election and stuff. It was a crisis moment, and the result of that has been, instead of like another big war and another big correction, it's been, a bull market in a stronger dollar, even though I think it's calmed down a bit, and then the S&P 500 going up a lot, even though it crashed recently. And I think right now we're at another one of those sort of moments where, like, a lot of the signs that we look at usually, like the yield and the yield curve of the interest rates or something like that, is inverting, and gold is starting to go up, and like there's a bunch of little things that are showing up that is like something's happening. um but I wonder if the optimism that Trump has brought to a certain amount of the American public, for better or for worse, whether it's true or not, there's this kind of renewed optimism, and I wonder if that's actually taking a bit of sort of the energy that Bitcoin had to be like, okay, all the fiat currencies are gonna go to shit and Bitcoin is gonna go to the moon. I mean, I think that's still there in the background. It's like a strong hedge, and if shit hits the fan, Bitcoin and gold and silver and some of these hard money things are going to be a good alternative. But I can't help but feel that the apocalyptic sort of vision or imagination that was before has kind of been pacified a bit.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say. Like, I'm certainly not an economist, so take whatever I have to say here with a grain of salt. But I think the dollar is still very strong, although we're seeing signs of that faltering. You've got Russia and China dealing with oil futures and the ruble and yuan. The Middle East stuff's a little bit changing with Iran not using the dollar, things like that. And so the dollar foothold may be weakening. However, let's say we're heading for a global financial crisis. All the smaller developing nations with weaker currencies and weaker economies are going to be hit first. And
Yeah.
so if the US dollar loses its foothold, I don't think that's going to be for a while. And, you know, looking at like the creative destruction potential of Bitcoin, like let's transition to a Bitcoin world, that is not going to be a smooth or pretty thing. It's going to be bad for most people for a long time. Honestly, I think that. So I think the best outcome from, if we could just play God looking down, is we would want a smooth transition that's slow.
Mm,
On a dollar crisis. We want just a
right.
smooth transition.
Yeah. Yeah, and that means sacrificing your immediate hopes for, $100,000 Bitcoin, by aiming for, like, a politically neutral money in 20, 30 years. I do think that we might have a moon cycle probably like the maybe end of 2020, but we'll see. Right now, the goal is, right now, good strategies accumulate and build businesses around it, and just have some portion of it and keep doing what you do, even if you don't have to work for Bitcoin. But anyway,
For sure. Yeah, I'm
do
kind
some
of
good
in
work,
that
accumulate a little
situation
bit.
right now where I have a few online businesses. That's how I've made my income since I left Oracle. And that's great. However, I find my motivations for projects outside of Bitcoin to be waning. And so I am sort of actively exploring the Bitcoin space, trying to see where I can both add the most value and where I think is a potentially lucrative use of my time. And so I'm really excited about all these Bitcoin first businesses popping up. Like I love the idea of everyone runs a full node and things like Casa and Nodal making that easier to do. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so I'm just a big supporter of investing in the Bitcoin space, but not necessarily, you don't have to work for Bitcoin Core or Chaincoin Labs or something like that, but tangential businesses I'm eye on.
Yeah, support businesses, maybe something like that. I think Cas is, I mean, it's the most exciting company in Bitcoin for me right now.
I tend to agree.
Yeah, yeah. I
And I
think
think it's going to be a commodity in the near future, the home node idea, but their UX forward process, I think they have a lot of clout with Jameson Lopp being involved. Um, they're doing a good job. They have a sexy product. People are
they
liking
do.
it. And just look at what the Lightning Network did in December. Last stat I saw was like 40% growth month over month. I don't know
Yeah,
how
it's
much.
going exponential.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lightning's going exponential. Yeah, Lightning adoption. Very exciting. I like to think that we're gonna see like a new boon of Lightning, the labs. The labs are gonna actually start happening over the next year or two, something like that, and those are gonna start actually catching on. Hopefully, we'll see that. I have a sense of that might happen. What exactly it might look like, I don't know. I hope it's some sort of social network thing. Social networks with crypto have always been kind of interesting, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Um,
Yeah, I'm with you on laps, though. I think what's interesting about that right now, they're not very sophisticated, but um, what I think is cool about it is we're going to be drawing developers who maybe don't have blockchain experience or Bitcoin experience directly. They come from a more traditional development world, and all of a sudden they can jump in and start building laps that interface with Bitcoin, and they already more or less have the skill set for that. And that's always the argument for Ethereum, like they're drawing the developer mindshare and on some levels, that's certainly true. However, if maybe Ethereum takes forever to transition, and who knows the future, if I'm if I'm an dApp developer on Ethereum right now, I'm taking a good hard look at that, and I'm starting to say maybe I should build applications through the Lightning Network.
yeah,
And so long term, that makes me extremely optimistic.
yeah, yeah, and go back to more traditional forms of fundraising, or maybe do more crowdfunding. Because the ICO is it's just a token that you got to jam into your business model. It just hasn't worked.
For
There's so
sure.
many usability problems. There's this one coin, and we're running in on 90 minutes now, so we can end it soon. But there was this. I went to this Ethereum conference in Prague a few months ago, and somebody gave me this pamphlet for a version of CryptoKitties that instead of kitties was dragons. And I like cats, but I like dragons better. I was like, yeah, okay, let's check it out, right? I kept the pamphlet for like 5 months. Yesterday I checked it out, 4 months. So I log in and ask me to log in on MetaMask. Okay, Beam shows me these are cool dragons, $10,000 a piece. Okay, right on. Then I go to the eggs basket, and there's here's the eggs. They're really cheap. You pick one, right? Okay, great. How do I get one? You gotta pay us with Suncoin. How do I get Suncoin? You need Ethereum, and somehow you gotta get Suncoin. My MetaMask has no money in it, so I can't even pay the transaction fees. They could send me some Suncoin. I can't send it back anywhere. It's dead end. And I'm a nerd. I can do it. I pretend like I'm an idiot, but I could probably do that. I could figure it out.
Yeah,
But it's too much. It's too big a barrier, and that's the economics question that I think the token people and the altcoin people don't get. Something has to reach mass adoption cryptocurrency status, and that's going to be the medium of exchange, and then you're going to build things around it. But yeah.
definitely. I'm not even too interested in medium of exchange right now. I just don't think that in the developed world there's any need for cryptocurrency day-to-day stuff. Like I think
Yeah.
the narrative around just store value or an asymmetric bet makes so much more sense. And long term, I think we'll build in medium of exchange type properties. But Yeah, people are always looking for this big app or whatever killer app nonsense. I don't think that really matters. I think Bitcoin just consumes unmet demand, and right now I don't think there's much demand for a better Visa, PayPal.
Even through the internet, like internet payments, you think? Because maybe I'm just too paranoid. Like I just hate giving my information to some random website every time I gotta buy a little thing.
Yeah, I mean,
That
some people
yeah,
feel that way. I don't
yeah.
think I don't
No,
think
most
enough
people don't.
people care about that.
Yeah,
I wish, one
yeah,
Bitcoin, like Marty Ben always says, Bitcoin changes you more than you're going to change Bitcoin. I
yeah,
certainly believe that. Now that people have money on the line, all of a sudden people take OPSEC serious. People
yeah,
like yourself don't want to give away their information online, and
yeah.
I think Bitcoin does that to people. It sort of forces you to say, "Hey, you don't know anything about money, and I know that's probably uncomfortable, but it's time to learn. And once you learn these things, your political views might start to shift. Your
Mm-hmm.
time preference might start to shift. You might
Yeah.
spend money on stupid shit and instead be like, well, $100 of Bitcoin today might be $10,000 of Bitcoin in 10 years. And
Wow.
that to me is fascinating where and I think that's sort of what Bitcoin is. You literally have to change the consciousness of the entire world for this thing to really reach its full potential. Not the entire world, but a lot of people. From money is green paper that comes from your government and whatever to money is this digital thing that no one owns that's almost impossible to understand completely. And so that consciousness shift, I think, is a crucial component here, and that's going to take a long time. Like we can
Yeah.
shut the mountain, but no one cares about censorship resistance unless they have a reason to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I think the truth is somewhere in there. I don't believe that we need to convince everybody about Bitcoin. Just like I don't believe that we need to convince everybody necessarily about freedom in order for freedom to be a thing. Like that is sort of like one of the modus operandi of libertarianism is just preach until everybody gets it, right? And I think that's a bad idea. I mean, no, I think it's a good idea to do, but it's a very long term, very very long term, very optimistic thing. And the thing that's interesting about Bitcoin is that if Bitcoin captures enough of a foothold, everything shifts to it. It's like a magnet, right? And you don't need to understand Bitcoin. You don't need to understand the fundamentals. It's gonna be a matter of like it's there, it is what it is, everybody uses it, it is the foundation, it is the rock, it is the water, and you just float around it, and it's no, you don't have to think about it anymore. And and it's probably going to be a generational thing. So like my children and our like the children of Bitcoiners will be the fish of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I sort of come off in like this recruitment mindset, but I don't actually think we should all be outbound marketing to
Right.
build
Yeah.
Bitcoin use
Have you
case. I
heard the
think,
word of Satoshi? Yeah.
and that's
The
what the
good
second,
word of Satoshi.
yeah, the second article I wrote is about the cult of Satoshi, and I think the
Yeah,
parallel,
I saw that.
but is it actually effective? I don't think so.
Yeah. That there is a bunch of values in the story of Satoshi that are interesting, and there is some parallels, like the Genesis story. There are some parallels. There's some interesting sort of mythological elements to it. We could probably talk about this some other time, but at the end of the day, it has to be useful, and you know it'll be useful for different people for different reasons. So this is interesting. Maybe Bitcoin is a society. Maybe that's the way.
Mm.
Yeah,
Bitcoin's so many things, man.
it's so many things. Yeah. Okay, last thought. Last two thoughts. So Patreon is starting to censor people, and then there's a variety of like controversial academic, let's say, type people or conversational explorers that is exiting, and they're actually shifting towards crypto. Like there's a full cultural movement, like mainstream cultural movement that's sort of shifting towards Bitcoin, and there's a kind of like a radicalization in the internet today between sort of software platforms and cultural icons, and they're opposed, like there's opposition in many ways, right? The cool people are getting banned, and and if they come to us, we become a society. We become an internet society, and it's a multi-jurisdictional society because we're all over the world. Maybe that's the way to sell it. I don't know. I'm just exploring this question you asked of like how do we tell the story? What's the story?
Yeah,
What's the meme?
I'm super interested in that, the deplatforming narrative, because it's an obvious use case for Bitcoin. And going back to it's a living organism that meets unmet demand, there's clearly a demand for a Patreon type service that is uncensorable. And so I think someone's built Tallycoin, or I'm not even familiar
Yeah.
with what's currently out there, but those type of things are going to be big. And if you get a Jordan Peterson or Dave Rubin, some other guys are talking about doing this,
Hmm.
that's going to be a pretty big flag in Bitcoin
Totally.
land. And it's also going to be used against us, right? Like
Oh
Bitcoin
yeah.
for drug dealers and WikiLeaks, and now it's used for people
Racists
who
and
hate
like
women. Yeah, all this silly stuff. But
yeah.
those guys are the people, whether you agree with everything they say or not, they're actually saying things, right?
Yeah.
They're having the debate. And I
They're
listen
having
a
yeah.
lot about what Jordan Peterson has to say. And if we don't have these conversations candidly, forget being politically correct, if we don't have these conversations, then these little subcommunities, they hide and they fester. And that's not going to be very useful. I think everyone's voice should be out there, and we can say, there's a lot of people talking about this, and it's stupid, and now everyone attacks them for bad ideas. And now those ideas die, and everyone knows they're bad, versus hiding in corners and these
Mhm.
little festering pockets of nonsense. They grow because no one shines a light on them. And so, free speech all day.
Absolutely, and yeah, 100%. Like it's the difference between having honest, sincere, in-depth conversations and shouting slogans and attacking people in any possible way that you can get away with it. All right, thanks so much for coming on. I think we can end it at that. I was gonna ask you about magic mushrooms, but you have any thoughts?
Well, I've never publicly talked about this before, but
Okay.
I support psilocybin mushrooms, and the science is also starting to support this stuff. I don't support it blindly. I don't think everyone should go buy some mushrooms and eat them. However, I think that in my personal life, they have been a transformational thing, a very positive thing. And if used appropriately, I think many more people could have a positive experience from this. And I think the science that we're coming out with right now in the United States, especially with things like the Hefner Institute, um, it's going to be stage 3, if not already, any time now. And I think more people should, quote, come out of the psychedelic closet. These are not drugs in the sense that they're demonized. And I think more people should keep an eye on them. And, there's value there. So there's my ramble.
Yeah, the science around psychedelics is actually coming back. It was banned for like a long time. It's probably I think like the 30s or so, because it was just so bizarre that you could sort of simulate these sort of religious experiences with this random sort of elements in nature, and yeah, so it's coming back. That's definitely fascinating. What was the institute you mentioned?
Hefner?
Hefner Institute. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
check
yeah.
that out and yeah.
And I
Okay,
was
and
also going
check out the
to
work of. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say one thing. Psilocybin is an interesting molecule when you talk about with nature. Like, why does a monkey's brain respond to psilocybin in these mushrooms? And we don't actually know how psilocybin was synthesized in the mushroom kingdom or why it exists. However, it very similarly mimics serotonin. And so
Wow.
it's we already have the little keyhole or the lock, whatever you want to say, in our brain for these molecules, just like THC or CBD.
Wow.
We have them built into us, and I think that points to the thing that we're a part of nature. We like to think we're this clever monkey with cool clothes on, and we're above nature and we can destroy it. But at the same time, we come from nature. Um, we have a lot to learn from nature, and I think we should be a little bit more humbled by the fact that we're a part of it
Wow.
and we are not above it.
That's fascinating. Also, you can quit smoking with psilocybin mushrooms. Just
For sure.
keep hearing about that. Anyway, do your own research. Definitely check out Brandon Quitem, the mushroom Bitcoin guy. Thank you for coming on, man. It was a great conversation.
For sure. Thanks, Juan. Had a great time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, take care. Enjoy, guys. Bye. Okay. Awkward exit, awkward ending, but we did
That's okay.
it.